So I bought this K Rhythmer, awesome name, awesome graphics, of course. Um, Off of eBay years ago for like $50. Um, the snare drum, the snare voice didn't work, and as you may be able to see, um, I replaced a bunch of components just slowly but surely because I was like, okay, well, let me see if something's bad or whatever. So I just went and replaced a bunch of components in it, and it didn't. These sockets are newish. Um, I couldn't figure it out, and then I was like going around with my meter, and I noticed the diode that was where this socket is now um had its like cathode going to the ground. I'm like, isn't this gonna send the signal to ground? So I removed it, and it worked. It worked fine. But I was like, well, it's kind of weird, like there's, as you can see, there's a symbol on the board showing you the direction that the diode was in. So it wasn't like the diode was in the wrong way. It was stalled the way it was, and obviously these were, multiple of these were made, so you would think like, did all of them not? Did the snare drum not work? Because of some weird error. So anyway, I just removed it, and it works. When I put it in there, it doesn't work. So anyway, last night I was like, hey, I really want to mod this a bit. It sounds really good. I like the voices. They're simple analog drum voices, but I love these old drum machines. They're just the greatest thing in the world to me. I'm just, the technology is like my favorite. Even more so than a lot of synth modules. It's just synth circuits. I just love analog percussion circuits that are in these because they're so simple, but they're so clever too. And yeah, so the bass drum's pretty kicking in this kick drum, but it's kind of distorted, not in a bad way, but in a way I didn't really want. I wanted like to give it more like clarity and like make it rumble things. So I couldn't find a schematic for this, but one day while looking on eBay, I saw it wasn't this one, but it was a variation of this. It like looks like the same, like everything's same, but I think there were some small things different. But in the listing, someone had a picture of like the inside of the wooden case that goes over top of this. That's not on it right now. And it had the schematic. So I like screenshot that, and then later on tried to print it out with my crappy printer, which it didn't do it super clearly, but you can obviously see the circuits, and the values are actually almost all the values are written on the board, which is pretty nice. But you really, I'm not good at like tracing out stuff. It's just a nightmare to me. But anyway, so I know all these circuits very well. So I know how to mod them to change the pitch and you generally have trim pots that set the these circuits to ring. They're essentially kind of like sine wave phase shift oscillators, and then at the you know, the emitter has a little trim pot underneath of it, and that sets the gain, and you set it so that it just is on the edge of oscillation, so when the trigger hits it, it rings, and you have a drum sound. And you change those 4 caps right there. Those are part of what sets the frequency of the ringing, and then also the resistors that go from those caps to ground. Anyway, back to the distorted bass drum. I looked at the schematic, and on here, up top here, you see that trim pot there, and that is apparently there to get rid of the distortion I'm talking about, or to a degree, because here is the output of the bass drum, that 50K and those 222K. Those that sets the level of the bass drum, as well as the woodblock sound. But anyway, this, instead of this resistor and pot there, trim pot there, they don't exist on this. So what I did was just put a resistor in there between that cap and the rest of the mixer circuit. I actually, put a socket in there, and then took wires onto a piece of breadboard, and experimented till I got, I pulled out the cap and then put in a cap and a resistor in there, and that kind of got things sounding nicer, less distorted. It was just hitting the. I'm sure that's why a later variation of it had that trim pot there, because it was just too distorted for, the average person. Thought it probably sounded broken or something. Here's a noise generator there. You see the noise next to the reverse avalanche diode thing, and then it's amplified, and then it's sent to these two, essentially 3 volume controls here. One sends it to the cymbal circuit, the noise to the cymbal circuit. One sends it to the hi-hat circuit. One sends it to the snare drum circuit. So you can, you kind of have to, like, it does, in this circuit, it really doesn't matter. I just kind of turn them all up. But sometimes, it's a little tricky, because what you have, each one of these circuits here, you have where it says SD, you have that diode, and then those, that's where a gate signal coming from the, the diode matrix over here, gets turned into a trigger. See those diodes? There's 2 back, in series going to ground. I had to remove one of those diodes to get it to work, but it's the same thing in these circuits, and it works fine. So I don't know. I still don't understand what the problem is. I, tried to think of a variety of things that could be making that, essentially send the trigger to ground there, which it shouldn't, because there's a cap right there to block it from doing that. It should just rectify it along with the diode that follows it. So anyway, but yeah, so then that hits, the noise goes from that, the noise generator to a trim pot, sends it through this little cap to the base of this transistor, and then where that diode and that 0.0068 cap, that cap basically sets the decay of the sound. So that 2.2 meg resistor and that 50K trim pot, which doesn't really seem to do anything. I was kind of surprised that that doesn't really affect the sound hardly at all. Whether you have it at 0 or 500K, doesn't seem to make a difference. But it's kind of like a very simple VCA type circuit with a trigger, and then there's like the attack. Well, it's really just a decay only type of envelope generator of sorts. But that, lets part of the noise out for a split second that cap lets it hang, and then it goes through this simple, passive mixer circuit into the output. And as you can see, the bass drum and the woodblock are same circuit, they're just tuned differently. So the one's tuned for super high, so you get that pinging sound, that high-pitched, clave. I don't know, I never really knew how you say that. Or a much lower one, which is a bass drum, and if you put it in between those two, you'll have like a tom sound. And but yeah, so anyway, I modded the signal going to the output amplifier so that it was cleaner sounding. This resistor right here is one of the resistors that controls the pitch of the bass drum, and I dropped it down. I removed the resistor, put a socket in, and experimented with different values until I found one I liked. Then I dropped the frequency of the bass drum down a bit, and then adjusted the gain so that it rings the way I want it. That's definitely something I've in the past removed the trim pot and put together a circuit that could have like an external pot knob to adjust how the bass drum, how long it rings, so you can set it so it's just like a real like quick thud, or like a really long ring where it's like it's still ringing when the next trigger hits it, so you get this cool kind of like rhythmic thing going on. And you can also just make that resistor a pot so you can change the pitch. So all these yellow caps here, these are, put sockets for them. These are all the caps on for the trigger inputs. See, like there, it looks like it's a 0.015. Those caps kind of determine like the width of the trigger. So, and because they're these are analog circuits, the trigger, the strength of the trigger, the width, all that stuff affects how it sounds. Not in a huge, massive way, but in a noticeable way. Like I beefed up the bass drum. This was like a 0.033, and I put a 0.1 cap in there, and it just hits the drum even harder. That it gives you that like heavy kick to it. Sounds better. And then these are for the hi-hat and the cymbal. I bumped those up, same thing. Not a huge difference, but like it just brings out those sounds a little bit more. Same thing for the snare. And if that cap, the red orange cap right there, which is just one I had replaced with what was already in there. Like if I make that bigger, it'll sound more like a cymbal, or like a it has kind of like a what's the I don't know. It sounds like you're like really like ringing like the snares on a snare drum, like, and it's like ringing. It's hard to describe, but I kind of like the way the snare drum is. It's, it's not the most realistic sounding, but I don't like these because they are realistic. I like them because they sound cool. You know, I have no need for a drum machine that sounds like a real drum. Like, I want electronic sounds, new sounds that, you know, have, are have a percussive nature to them. But of course, one of the main things I wanted to do with this was tap the clock so that there's a clock output, so that I can use this as like a master clock for my modular system, plus have the drum voices as well to use, but have it all synced up. Now, one of the things that I do with drum machines when I mod them is, and it's one of the simplest things you can do with these types of drum machines, you find where the triggers get sent to the voices. And on here, it's at the edge of the board. It's often like this, at the edge of the board, and there's the bass drum, there's the wood block, hi-hat. These wires that go there send, are where they send the triggers. So you put just a toggle switch, cut that wire, solder in another wire, connect it to toggle switch, mount them on the front of it or whatever. Now you can cut out any of the drum voices that you want. So if you just want like the bass, use the bass drum in some, with your modular or with whatever, you can get rid of individual sounds, and that can often really change the way the beat sounds. So yeah, I keep thinking I'm gonna drill this out and put some little toggle switches here for that same reason I'm just describing. And part of me doesn't want to like blemish this, but I mean I could do it really, really nicely and even put like label, like clear with like white lettering labels, and or just have, just nice mini toggle switches there. Yeah, and the beats are okay. It's tough. Well, you can obviously modify the rhythms by messing with these diode matrices. I have no idea how to decide. I don't know. I don't understand the timing of beats and the calculations involved to be able to mod something and have it be better than what it was, because it's more of what I wanted, because I don't know how to, you know what I mean? I know you can't answer me, but and up here there's like the master clock circuit, and then there's, these are like flip-flop circuits here, and then they go into these, I guess these are other like not IC, but I mean they're where is it? Right there. I think that device right there is these two guys. I can't really see exactly what they are. I think they're just flip-flops as well, but they may be some kind of latch. But anyway, they're made to kind of they're built to kind of be like a shift register, essentially. All these things put together, and then here's all the outputs of the shift register. So it's like a, it's kind of like a very complex version of a CD 4017 binary counter. and then each one of, so it like goes in sequence, puts a, a gate out at each point, sends it down through here, and this is like a whole bunch of like logic gates, but made out of just diodes, connected a certain way, and depending on how they're connected, they end up being, how they're connected, and then how they're tapped, which is like these switches here, which is, this switch matrix. The other thing that didn't work when I got it is this tempo light. I don't know if the light is bad. It's, I guess I should get in there at some point. Just, some part of me dislikes dismantling like these type of not mechanisms, but when things are like built all close like that, because it can be such a nightmare to get everything lined back up again and fit in there properly. But yeah, so main reason I even made this video is just went off with everything else is so I tapped the clock, like the the fastest clock signal in on the board, tapped that, and built this buffer board that buffers it and does a little drops, makes it so the output will be a 5-volt positive gate signal. And I wired up the jack for it, drilled a hole for the jack, and then a hole for this bolt and nut so that I can mount this way. I put some tape there so that it doesn't short out. It's not going to touch because there's a nut there, but shaking around, who the hell knows. But yeah, and then I'll be able to do that. I'm going to solder caps in place here once I'm sure I'm good with the values of those. Just threw these in because they stay in place easily because the leads are kind of thick. Yeah, I wanna I may mod it in the future, but I know I'm not going to do that right now, so I'm going to try to get this put back together, because if I don't, I will misplace all the nuts and screws, and I'll just be like kicking myself because I, did what I've done since I was a little tiny kid, taking shit apart and then being like, oh, I don't know where the nuts and bolts are doing. That must be a thing. I've heard other people do that, taking things apart and seeing what's going on inside. Something I've literally been doing since I was too old to be taking something that plugs into the wall apart, but that didn't stop me. Even now I sliced my finger. I remember plugging it when I was I was probably like 5 years old. I had like this, I think it must have been some kind of inductor. It's like a coil that was wrapped in something, and I had 2 leads, and I said, oh, there's a wall socket, and I went boop, plugged the 2 wires right into there, and it burnt like lines into my finger and like shocked me. Kind of scary. Good thing I didn't kill myself. That was late 70s, so people were not as cautious as they are now. Thank God. Thank God they're more cautious now. Anyway, once I put everything back together again, I'm gonna do a video of what it sounds like. 'Cause like I said, this sounds really good, and the bass drum, especially now, is just like fucking just badass. It's just like really like rap. I mean, my if I turn this thing up a little too loud, like I can hear the speakers in my like killer closed back 412 cabinet. Even then, they're like you can hear like the speakers like flubbing. Like it's awesome. So, anyway, I'll be back.